At first glance, and especially with the violent blue waters, it would not be unreasonable to assume we are somewhere in the Pacific. But this is the site of a Bronze Age settlement from around 3,000 years ago that sits on the shore of a massive inland lake in the Balkans. It has the somewhat piratey name of the Bay of Bones, a slightly over-dramatised nod towards this part of the lakeshore being known for potsherds and other artefacts just washing up. After some archaeology done from 1997 onwards, they have built this reconstructed settlement from around the Bronze Age. If you've been watching our episodes of the last few months, you'd know that this summer had been especially rich for pile-dwelling sites, be they in Switzerland on Lake Neuchâtel or the Pfahlbauten Uldingen on the German side of Lake Konstanz. Often with recreations of sites like this, you run into the problem of burden of proof. You have to make some decisions, but some of those interpretations may be less well supported than others. For example, at these pile-dwelling sites, we discover, well, the piles, but the dwellings above them, and even just the boardwalks linking them, are a bit more speculative. But there's pretty high confidence around the piles supporting a platform around 8,500 metres squared, and a line of piles marking the bridge to the shore. I am just grateful they've taken a shot with this. As a member of the public, to be able to explore and photograph a place like this, even if some of the speculated details might be disagreed upon, this gives you a pretty good impression of what the community may have looked like up to 3,000 years ago. So we are at Lake Ohrid. This is on the North Macedonian side. The lake is split with Albania, and if you've caught the last two episodes, we've been zigzagging up and down Albania, catching as many ancient sites as we could. For reasons of Byzantine architecture, which we'll get to in due course, Ohrid had been on the list for a long time now, but despite it presenting a not inconsiderable digression from the rest of our Albania exploring, it would turn out to be a high watermark of the whole trip. So we are Forest Archaic Collective, and as well as making jungle drum and bass, we've followed ancient sites across Europe and beyond. Whether it's Neolithic standing stones, Roman arches, or Romanesque churches, we are proudly and fiercely AI free. We've always believed that if we're going to share these stories about ancient places, we need to go and film them for ourselves, not just spam a stock library, definitely not get the data centers to slop out some half plausible looking garbage. Actually go and see these things for ourselves to show you, so please support us in doing that. More on how at the end of the video and in the description. Right, well, departing Tirana, we were heading east on what was at first a great road, followed by a somewhat less adequate road past Elbasan. We'll circle back to that later. As we wove deeper into the east, the infrastructure projects became more and more evident. Up to this point in the trip, we'd encountered several road layouts, or entire roads where the sat-nav was just like, well, that's news to me. Here, the newer highways were actually in process of being carved out of the river valley. There were some curiosities of the more remote parts of the country. Our route was shadowed by a train line that looked like it hadn't had a train on it for decades. After a couple of hours and the clouds starting to gather, we got our first glimpse. There is Lake Ohrid. We were still on the Albanian shore for now. We hadn't had a decent meal, so we dropped into the pretty small village of Lin, and there was this, kind of interesting restaurant jutting into the lake. While it had been raining, it obligingly stopped by this point, allowing us to take a seat for drinks and a bite in amongst all the cats. Got an espresso for basically £1 and a very generous glass of Reiki. I had perhaps stupidly thought this dish of peppers and cheese would be hot, which it wasn't. Thankfully, I wasn't hugely hungry, but this was it was quite tart. It was, I don't think it was a very good balance of flavours. Egg on my face for ordering it. I don't know, I just thought it'd be fine had it gone through an oven. Anyway, with the boys tucking into slightly more substantial fare, I slipped off to catch a specific target. Perched above the town is this ruined Roman basilica with frankly incredible views of the lake. Please just enjoy these for a moment. Lynn is a funny place. It was probably the smallest and most, I hate to use the word, but quaint place we'd yet seen. It's kind of what you picture if you try and summon to mind what a remote Balkan village looks like. I mean, there's not a tremendous amount here. It's kind of remarkable that a town that spills onto something as beautiful as Lake Ohrid has remained as small and obscure as it has. The road links here are solid enough. It would be a shame, but not that surprising, if in the next decade Albania decided to maximise its Ohrid lakeshore and a bunch of hotels sprung up around here. Anyway, we headed out of Lynn, and shortly we're at the border. This was a first time into North Macedonia for us. It's kind of a sizable wait for only maybe 15 to 20 cars ahead of us, but the border was straightforward enough. So, first glimpses of North Macedonia, as is always the way with border crossings. At first, there are few to no visual differences, but before long, the landscape opened up to afford us a view of the lake. Pulling into the town of Ohrid, which is modestly big, but, still easy enough to navigate, we dropped our stuff to the hostel and headed back out. Low-angle flag shot. Ohrid is an extremely special place. How else can I put it than that? Any reputation it's gained for its beauty is richly deserved. The tight streets have a poetry to them, kind of resonant of the Italian lakeshore towns along like Como or Garda. I'll confess the position of the sun and the evening light was a mixed bag photographically. Funny enough, the theory was as a group we'd be jumping right in the water, but I actually split off because there was just too much I was impatient to see in the town. One of the first places I headed was the Church of St. Sophia. You can see the wonderful Romanesque details on the outside. And working through the town, you get to the theatre of Lycnidos, which was founded around 200 BC. A little higher, and I found myself at the Plaushnik archaeological area. The light was starting to go, so I didn't spend too long there. More on that in the morning. With not much time for photography left, just got some shots of the castle. That felt pretty good. I might just let these run for a moment. So while I hadn't caught everything yet, that felt like a pretty good first glance at the town. And then rejoining the boys about the time the direct sunlight was gone, but the rich colours were just setting in. And I don't really have much footage for this night, but look, I know I have the face of someone who likes hosteling. I get that, but this was just one of the best examples of the sort of camaraderie and human connection you can get in a hostel, and really nowhere else I know of. It was one of the volunteers' birthdays, so the hosts were carving up a homemade cheesecake between around 20 people, and everyone was just talking with everyone, swapping stories. Just immaculate. I have no notes, just a real joy of a night. Although the steady supply of Reiki I was sipping throughout the evening would come back to bite, as I got up a little after 6 to go and see the town at dawn. It was quiet, but I was far from the only one out. Quite a few locals, assorted dog walkers and joggers alike. I finally got to the end of this less than especially reassuring wooden walkway, round a couple more paths, and this is the Church of John the Evangelist, and it's the place that's launched 1,000 Ohrid trips. Ohrid has a wealth of incredible compositions, but everyone seems to have decided that this Byzantine church is the showpiece. So if this looks familiar, that's why. It's not to throw shade. It felt amazing after all this time to get to see this for myself, but I didn't feel the need to stay there for hours taking and retaking roughly the same shot. Wandered up the hill further and found myself in something of a small forest that occupies the slopes to the west of the castle. Further up and back to the Plaushnik archaeological area, it's a bit of an odd duck. It's got these Byzantine-style buildings, which I believe were part of the university. There's a lot of archaeology out in the open of various eras. Thing is, it appears tools were downed a while ago, and the site is in a bit of an odd limbo. There's ruined basilicas and baptistries, and a lot of it is laden with weeds, and there's buildings that appear to have been conceived to house parts of it, but still unfinished. There's the Church of St. Clement, which looks like it was completed last week. I mean, the church does date back to the 800s, but the restorations undertaken from around 2002 have made it look so new, I'm unsure if any of the original masonry actually remains. I did get some more aerial shots of the castle, and in the short time I had, it's funny, for a town that seems super quaint and you sort of assume, small, it actually takes the best part of a half an hour just to thread through all the streets and get back to the hostel in the suburbs part of Ohrid. Well, we got out of town just before 9 and drove south to the eastern bank of the lake, and this was our chance to catch the Bay of Bones. It was just ludicrously exciting. It helps that it's a large settlement rather than just, having one recreated dwelling over the grass somewhere. They've actually conjectured a large settlement, and the ability to lose yourself in the variety of dwellings is mesmerising. It was only about £2 in, which is ridiculous. I'm really looking forward to the day we do a full episode on the pile-dwelling settlements and the Bronze Age. You might have noticed that despite seeing all these ancient places, our explanations in these episodes are really just summaries. We're building towards doing big history-focused series, whether it's episodes on the Byzantine Empire. We've caught a lot from there, from Istanbul to the Balearic Isles, from the Cyclades to South Italy, but we've still got a lot more to see. This autumn, we're going to be getting back to our Hill Fort series. There's loads you can already catch there in the playlist, including our conversations with Dr. Miles Russell and Dr. Toby Driver, just about all things Iron Age. As far as this series, it's exciting to add more to the Balkans playlist. We can now include North Macedonia to that, on top of a large number of episodes from the Croatian Adriatic, journeys into Bosnia, Montenegro, Albania, of course, Bulgaria, Thessaloniki. There's loads you can catch there, so why not load that up for after this? But most of all, please make sure to hit the notification bell. I hoped we'd get past this, but yeah, some weeks the platform likes us, some weeks 200 views, and then we're hiding your stuff from your audience. They'll never see it, and no, we'll never specify why. We'll just suggest it's your fault or something. It's incredibly discouraging, so the help would be much appreciated, and if you have notifications on, you've actually got a chance of seeing what we're up to. Okay, well, before leaving, a brief look at the pretty incredible Roman auxiliary fort that sits on the rise above the museum. It's pretty impressive, even if, again, this is a bit like Switzerland, actually. These walls are modern and have been used to mark how the fort would have looked. Certainly hard to picture a Roman fort that's more spectacularly situated. Well, back to Ohrid, we were overdue a coffee, and while the phrase Steve's Coffee House doesn't sound like a great establishment, it actually turned out to be a pretty impressively modern spot just by the water. From there, I'm sad to say, it was a few parting shots of the town, and then we had to be on our way. Since it happened to be right on our petrol stop, I did just take a peek at the ruined basilica on the hill above the town, and then it was back through the countryside past Ohrid Airport, and then before long, back across the border to Albania. I was frankly amazed that there was little to no sign of a tourism boom. Ohrid, the town, has quite a bit catering to guests, and it was moderately buzzy, but nothing invasive or overly modern. Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, North Macedonia doesn't have a coastline. I'd almost expected at least half the country to be decamping there. I referenced the tragedy of the Commons last time. I think our relative obscurity as a channel shields us from really triggering an actual change in human behaviour that results in a higher footfall at Lake Ohrid. I'll just say that it's very fortunate that a place this special has not massively ballooned in visitor numbers and commensurate tourist tat. So that's really nice. Well, we're not ready to park this episode just yet. YouTube really does punish you for series or mini-series, which sucks because that's all we ever do. Next episode, we're going to explore Montenegro some more, but at the tail end of this, we've got a couple more places to see from Albania. Snaking back across the partly constructed routes, I may have understated the amount of ground we're covering. It's quite a lot. Needing a pause, we stopped off in Elbasan. With a lot of the Adriatic, there's something of a natural through line of tourists heading down the coast, maybe ducking inland a little way for, say, Tirana, for example. But Elbasan is likely not at the top of most people's itineraries, but it is pretty incredible. We paused in a cafe, and then I scampered off to catch, first this ruined basilica of Bezistan that was actually a cathedral built in the 400s, but then the walls of Elbasan. These are really something. Now, whenever you give a foundation date for something, particularly as it gets earlier and earlier, you have to answer the question of, okay, sure, so foundation maybe about 3 to 400s AD, maybe more fortification work in the 500s, but what about what I'm actually looking at? Has it survived in this form for 1,500 years? Well, the Ottomans did quite a lot of work to make it secure again, but looking at the masonry, I can't be confident portion by portion, but it looks like a fair amount is from the original later Roman walls. So yeah, that was a pretty great stop. We still had to make quite a bit of distance up to the north. The motorways are pretty great. So it was long but comparatively easy going. We passed Leisure from a few days previous, the castle dominating the landscape. And then as we got to the evening, we arrived in Shkoda. Yeah, if there's a nuance of pronunciation I've entirely missed here, I don't know, Sumi, I guess. This is pretty close to the Montenegro border. In fact, you can see into Montenegro from the rise up here. I don't have to tell you that with a castle like this, It's got some pretty incredible history. We got some wide views of it. We headed up, but it was past closing time, so we weren't expecting to get in. Parking is pretty limited around there. Even in the evening, we couldn't get a space. A bit of a view, but more to come. With that, we headed into the city. It's pretty busy, a lot of cars. We spotted a supermarket parked with some difficulty, and do they know it's Christmas time at all? They actually took card. This was practically a first in Albania. You know, you might as well have tried to pay in Dogecoin than expect there to be a card terminal in most businesses here. So we found our hostel. This place, it was pretty great. There's quite a lot of stray animals inside, which you could sort of pet, though they're a little shy. You know, it has that scrappy, independent hostel vibe. This is not really a criticism per se. It just didn't have the warmth of the Lake Ohrid place. The bar was cool, I liked the details, but just, it didn't feel as welcome. I needed to get a little more cash, so I had to head out into Skoda at night. You know, nice, very busy. You know, aside from the neighbours of Tirana and Durrës, this has to be one of Albania's most important cities. I thought I'd filmed this, but, you know, despite trying several, I couldn't find any ATMs that weren't bleeding me for at least £7 sterling just for the privilege of withdrawing cash. And, you know, we were crossing the border tomorrow, so I neither wanted nor needed loads. Yeah, I really hated this about Albania. I don't want to lay this at the door of individual vendors or small businesses, but something is really up with banking here. You know, don't tell me that places like this, or this couldn't have a card terminal if there wasn't some major cost or downside to doing so. You know, the fact that you can't do anything without cash, you know, cash that can only be obtained from banks, creaming off a ridiculous amount. You know, as you can tell, I don't have the full picture here, but something's up. And yeah, this varies hugely nation to nation. You know, Prague was surprisingly cash-based, whereas North Cyprus was surprisingly card-friendly. But the way in which a debit card just doesn't spend in Albania in the 2020s. So, next morning, I suggested to the boys they could get a chill morning while I walked across town. It was about 45 minutes, so nothing but perfectly doable. It was a nice wander, you know, seeing a bit more of the city, which is fairly modern, quite a lot of bike use, quick espresso, and after the heat started to pick up, I was just short of Skoda Castle. Which, okay, I'm going to be annoying and hard cut there, because next time we're going to be going back into Montenegro. We've already got 2 episodes from there, you know, see the Balkans playlist I mentioned, but we're actually getting to explore some parts I'd been itching to catch, whether it's the capital, Podgorica, or the ruined Roman city to its north, or the small mountain town from which the modern nation of Montenegro actually grew at a time when the rest of its lands were owned by other powers. Plus a revisit of some familiar places, so we'll cover the rest of this story then. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can catch it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support us by flicking us a few quid, that's the place to do it. Also, we are kind of working to something of a backlog. I don't know if I mentioned this is actually the summer of 2024. We are nearly through, by the way. We're going to be getting to some more recent stuff before long, but to see what we're doing on more of a week-by-week basis, follow us on Blue Sky. Otherwise, yes, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can actually see what we're up to, and we'll catch you very soon.